So we're a few minutes past noon. I think we'll get started. On behalf of the Community Foundation of Mississauga, I'd like to offer all of you a warm welcome. My name is Lisa Stieg-Maximic, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I'm a volunteer member of both the Endowment Committee and the Granting Committee at the Community Foundation of Mississauga. I'm also a lawyer with Palavallo in Mississauga, where I focus on wills and estates. We have lots in store for you for the next hour. In a moment, I will introduce the Foundation President and CEO, Anne-Marie Pierce, to say a few words. I'll then introduce our three panelists, and then we'll hear their great presentations. Some housekeeping matters first. Before we begin, please be aware that we are recording today's session. We'll ask everyone to please keep your microphones muted. Today's presentation will be available as an ongoing resource on the Foundation's website, so you'll have access to that following today's presentations. And you will have an opportunity to ask your questions. If you have any, please do add them in the chat. You'll see the chat at the bottom of your screen. You can just add your question as it comes to mind, and we'll get to your questions at the end. The Endowment Committee at the Community Foundation of Mississauga was formed in order to assist the Foundation with its community work by educating and attracting donors to its endowment. Joining me on the committee are Chair Tom Cooney, Michael Gesualdi, Jim Kennedy, Susanna Winsborough, Kevin Wong, and the Foundation's President, Anne-Marie Pierce. We've designed this series to provide helpful information to assist you and your clients as they consider their financial, legal, and tax plans and how they can impact their community through philanthropy. Today's session is the second in our series aimed at providing tools for starting the philanthropic conversation with clients. This is also important information for those working in the charitable sector, and today we welcome guests who are advisors, individuals, and charities. I'd like to start by introducing Anne-Marie Pierce, the President and CEO of the Community Foundation of Mississauga, to provide some background on the Foundation and its endowment model, and why donors are attracted to aligning their philanthropic goals with the Community Foundation. Please welcome Anne-Marie Pierce.
Thanks very much, Lisa. I would like to add my own warm welcome to you today. We are so pleased to present our second installment in our ongoing charitable giving series, and we hope that it will be of benefit to advisors, individuals, and charities alike. Our foundation was established 20 years ago as a grant-making community foundation, one of 191 across Canada. We joined them with a commitment to doing good works in our individual communities. I wanted to take a few moments to talk about the Community Foundation's endowment model that is consistent across all community foundations for the benefit of our community as a long-term, steady source of monies that are granted to charities each year. Charitable gifts are used to set up an endowment fund at the Community Foundation. The amounts required to establish a named fund vary and are very accessible to any donor. As you'll hear today, a variety of funding sources can be used to establish this fund. The gift is held by the foundation forever, in perpetuity, and the benefits to charity are unending. Next slide, please. Donors like our model because they can work with us to establish a fund type that addresses their charitable vision with as much or as little hands-on involvement. With a donor-advised fund, for instance, donors can work with us to advise us of the charities they wish to grant to each year. With a donor-designated fund, they can specify the charity of their choice to receive ongoing grants. What is true for these and for all funds is that they are permanent, and so in perpetuity, they make an impact on charities. Next slide, please. Our foundation is attractive to donors for a number of reasons. They can specify multiple charities as a recipient of their philanthropy. They can name the fund to honor someone special. Many choose the family fund name. It becomes a family focus where generations of family members can become involved in granting decisions. They can establish a fund during their lifetime, add to it at any time, and have the pleasure of knowing how the charities benefit from their giving. Many donors also choose to establish a fund with a legacy bequest through their estate plans, knowing that their chosen charities are funded on an ongoing basis forever. Donors also have the confidence in our endowment fund. We benefit from the professional management of Connor, Clark and Lunn, along with an experienced investment committee that ensures that we maximize returns for long-term growth. As of last year, the endowment is at $23 million. And finally, donors are pleased to know of the impact that they continue to make in our community. Because we grant across all sectors, we know our community extremely well. Our team is experienced in assessing community needs and making effective grants, both with and on behalf of our donors. To date, our grants total $20 million, and charities across Mississauga and Peel have benefited. With our donors, we help to build a healthy, dynamic, successful community where everyone has an opportunity to thrive and no one is left behind. Next slide, please. We hope that today you find inspiration in our second session in the Charitable Giving series. I know that you have the privilege of working with clients as they shape their future and their philanthropy. The Community Foundation has also had this honor, and we believe that giving should be a joyful experience. If at any time you would like further information about charitable giving for your practice, we offer a host of resources on the Advisor tab on our website, and we can help with specific information on whether our foundation is the right model for your clients. I am happy to help. Enjoy the session. I'll now turn the session back over to Lisa McStemick.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, for the background information about the foundation and some of the great work that it does. I'd now like to introduce our three panelists. Our first speaker will be Tom Cooney. Tom is a senior wealth advisor with Asante Capital Management Limited. He works with individuals and families as they work to identify, plan, and achieve their financial goals. His focus is on building, implementing, and reviewing financial plans that are in alignment with his clients' values. Tom is a certified financial planner, chartered life underwriter, certified professional consultant on aging, and registered financial planner. Tom is a past board member of the Community Foundation of Mississauga and currently chairs the Endowment Committee. He's also the president of the Estate Planning Council of Mississauga. Our second panelist will be Armando Minicucci. Armando is a partner in Grant Thornton's tax practice and is a member of its national succession and estate planning team. Armando provides tax services to a diverse group of private and owner-managed businesses and high net worth individuals, not-for-profit clients, charities, and private foundations. Armando is a member of the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, the Canadian Tax Foundation, and the Mississauga Estate Planning Council. He has extensive experience lecturing and presenting at various events and is a regular participant and contributor to the Toronto West Practitioners Group and to Carswell's Tax Hyperion publication. You may have seen Armando in the national media, as he's often consulted to address current tax matters. He's regularly featured on the CTV National News. And rounding out today's discussion, our third panelist is Craig Ross. Craig is a partner at Pallet Vallow LLP and is the practice group head of the Estates and Trust Group. Craig was one of the founding directors and is a past president and member of the Estate Planning Council of Mississauga. Craig is proud to be a past vice president and continuing member of the board of directors of Community Living Mississauga. Craig is frequently invited to speak to community groups, businesses, and professional associations on issues of estate planning and estate administration. Craig's written many articles, and some of which have been published in the Toronto Star, Deadbeat, The Last Word, and Thomson Reuters TaxNet Pro, and some other publications. In 2013, Craig received the Volunteer NBC John Huther Award for Volunteering Excellence. And in 2017, Craig received the Volunteer Champion Award from the City of Mississauga. So to start us off, I'd like to call on Tom Cooney for his remarks. Tom?
Can you hear me okay?
Beautifully, thank you.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to get started on my very first slide, and that is, what does a financial advisor do? So I'll start out with, this is kind of like a pilot having their checklist, and I liken it to that. So just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. We start off with our clients initially finding out really what it is that they own, what they owe, what their cash flow looks like, their tax situation. We understand whether they have wills, powers of attorney, whether they have various forms of insurance. We really want to take that snapshot view of them at this moment in time when we first meet. So that information takes them a while to get together and then pass along to us. So it might happen in the first meeting or two, or sometimes three. But just the facts is the beginning. Then secondly, goals and priorities. What are they trying to accomplish? You've heard the saying, a goal without a number is simply a slogan. Well, guess what? You need to start putting some numbers and dates to those goals. So if I want to make work optional, I'll ask them, or they want to make work optional, I'll ask them to pick a date and time. Don't say somewhere between 50 and 60. Pick a moment in time. Then what's that mean to them? Ask them what the dollar amount in today's dollars means on a monthly basis to help them visualize what those goals are. And then finally, ask them to visualize the emotion that they're going to feel. So fast forward to that date, June 10th, 2025. You're there, you're fully independent, financially speaking. How, in a word or a sentence, does that make you feel? So getting to that emotion, and then helping them as they've identified their goals to set the priorities. What's most important? And likewise, then what's least important? So go through the list. Third, identify problems and opportunities. So we know a lot of the facts now from point one. We know what they're trying to accomplish. We can then run various analyses for them. So run various what-if scenarios and identify what could or couldn't work for them and have that discussion at that point. Finally, that culminates then in the preparation of a report with recommendations and alternatives. So we'll look at the pros and cons of that report and present that to them. Then implementation. If that plan just sits in their desk drawer and does nothing, we haven't helped them at all get from point A to point B, and it really is a useless exercise. So implementation is key. So we assist them with that, and we identify who's responsible for what activities over what period of time. And then finally, review, update, and revise. So these plans are out of date as soon as they're printed. So we need to update them on a regular basis. We meet at least annually, and in some components of their plan, we'll need to meet on a more regular basis, perhaps as much as quarterly. So that's what a financial advisor does. And in terms of philanthropy, we'll go to the next slide. Help me with philanthropy. Clients will ask us for assistance here. In some cases, they're silent on it, so it's up to us to instigate or get things going, be proactive. I'm going to refer now to a study that was done. This is available on wealthadvisor.ca, and it relates to a report. They comprised 10 articles in 2015 based on a 2014 study done by Ipsos Canada, sponsored by BMO Wealth Management, Canadian Association of Gift Planners, Give3 Foundation, and Philanthropic Foundations of Canada. Great publication. If you have an opportunity, have a look at that. And what they found is the most important thing for clients when thinking about philanthropy is, how do I make an impact? 55% of respondents said that. At the other end, or the other extreme, was tax relief, 21%. I would have thought it was the opposite. When I first started looking at this, I thought it was the absolute opposite. That's not to say tax relief isn't important. It's definitely a factor, but it's not the overwhelming thing. If you think about making an impact, that's an emotional connection that someone has. What difference am I going to make in my life by this contribution? Point two here is clients often feel overwhelmed. How do I decide? I know in COVID times, we're getting phone calls at home, we're getting emails, we're getting mail, we're getting commercials. We're all getting inundated with requests for help. And there's so many good charities out there. How do I decide? So it's how do I sift through that information and make a good decision that's right for me? Third, a life event. What's the best fit? So maybe a spouse has passed, or there's been a divorce, or there's been an inheritance, or maybe a downsizing, and there's some new equity that could be redeployed in a more efficient manner. So what's the best fit for me when that happens, if I am thinking philanthropically? Disorganized. Who got when what? You know, when we look at clients' tax returns, we don't just look at the notice of assessment. We actually look at the full return, so we can actually see what, if any, contributions have been made to philanthropy, to various charities over the years. And, you know, in some cases, you'll see 2 or 3 receipts repeated for the same charity. Well, often that's not on purpose. It was, you know what, I forgot that I made the contribution in January, and I've got to make it again in August or December when I'm asked again. So putting a plan in place that organizes that or helps them understand what they've been giving to in the last several years, it's enlightening for them to understand, yes, I've donated this percentage of my philanthropy to this sector. I didn't know that, because often it's on a reactive or ad hoc basis or in response to someone that's close to us who's asked us to support them. Ways to give: cash versus securities, just a couple of quick examples. Which is better of those two? Looking at it, it's important to sift through and understand all the different options that are available for clients. And then legacy: teach my children well. Old Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song, yes. And that really comes down to, do I want to be remembered, or what do I want to be remembered for? Can I make an impact not only now, but through after I'm gone? Could that be in perpetuity? So help me with philanthropy. That's an important one. Next slide, please. Having the philanthropic conversation, that's the next biggie. And that is, when should I have it? How should I have it? Who gets it going? Values-based estate planning. I don't know if many of you have heard of Scott Fithian. The late Scott Fithian wrote a book, Values-Based Estate Planning. I've read it 2 or 3 times. Great book. And what Scott looked to is, what clients need to understand. Am I financially independent? That's got to be taken care of. It's kind of like going back to Maslow's hierarchy. I've got to be taken care of first, that I'm secure. And then secondly, what about my family legacy? I want to leave a certain amount or certain things to my children and grandchildren. And then finally, well, what's my social capital legacy? How am I going to give back to society? How am I going to make my mark on the world? How am I going to leave that mark on the world? So that's values-based estate planning, and connecting that emotion with the actual giving plan itself. Having the conversation sooner rather than later. Advisors, when they were polled in this study, well, you know what? They thought common sense tells you that as you build a relationship with a client, it gets more secure, you feel more comfortable with one another. Once we've had that security and built that solid foundation, that's the time to have the conversation. That's the opposite of what clients said. Clients said, no, I would prefer to have that conversation much sooner as opposed to later. So it doesn't mean in the very first meeting you're bringing that up, but when you've got that list of assets, liabilities, you've got the list of taxes, and you understand where charitable giving has occurred, that's a stepping point. When you're getting into the conversation about estate plans, whether you have a will or powers of attorney and what that will looks like, I read through those, then it's important. And you have that conversation relatively early on, certainly within the first year of that relationship. Share your story, get personal. What do I mean? That means, how have you talked about your own philanthropy? Have you told your story? And have you encouraged others to then likewise tell theirs? Within my practice, I do make it a point when we have various charitable events that we can coordinate a small group of clients and have them come to that event as an appreciation. So not, this is my charity, I present it as my charity, this is the work that I'm doing, I just want you to be aware of it, and I want you to have some fun at the same time. A holiday season letter. Around Christmas time, we do send a letter out as opposed to a card, and we always talk about what it is that we're accomplishing this year. And we've supported a child for many, many years. When that child reached 18 in their community, when that child reached 18, a new one came in, so we introduced the new one. And it's amazing the connection that you have with clients. The emails that come in, the phone calls that happen, the next meeting, people then start to talk about, thank you for that. And guess what? This is what we're doing. So they're starting to share their philanthropy with you. So they need to know that you're a leader, that you're someone who they understand wants to make a mark and make a difference within the community. And likewise, they want to be connected with you, and they want to show you what they're doing as well. And then process. Ask great questions and step back and listen. Take very good notes. And that leads us to the next slide. The top 5 questions. There's tons of questions. There's great questions. You Google the philanthropic conversation and you'll come up with a variety of questions as well. These I particularly like. Do you have any charities that you would like to support? It gets the conversation going. I mean, if it's an absolute no at that point, maybe this isn't a good fit for me as a client-advisor relationship. That's quite possible. What is it about those charities that resonates with you? So again, that's that personal connection. What is it that really makes that charity come alive for them, that they want to support it, and here's what that charity is doing likewise. Do you involve your family in your giving plans? So do you involve your children if you have children or grandchildren, or perhaps if you've got other close friends that you want to be involved in that overall giving plan? It's important to communicate that with them. Would you like your charitable giving to continue after you pass away? So that's that. Do I want to make a difference in perpetuity? could I do that as an example with the community foundation through a donor advised fund? Be a great opportunity to have that capital sit there and have the income off of that, then give forever and ever and ever. And in thinking about the best charitable giving experience you've had, what made it that way? So that gets at, you know, all the bells and whistles at that point. They're telling you their story. They're saying, you know what, Tom, this was the greatest experience I had because of A, B, C, D, and E. And that's really, at that point, you're really starting to drill down and connecting with your client to ensure that at some point, you're going to put together a charitable gift plan with them. And back to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Tom. Some really helpful insights from your practice area. And I think the tip I took away from there is the listen piece. It's a small word, but a really important bit of advice. When we listen to clients, it's amazing how far we can help them. So thank you for that. Next, we've got Armando Minicucci with information from the tax advisor's perspective.
Thank you, Lisa. And Tom, that was fantastic. I really liked your little summary there of with respect to the percentage of donors that actually consider the tax implications. And if I heard you correct, did you say that only 21% of them actually take into account the tax implications? Was that
yeah, or
correct?
They felt,
Did I hear
or
that
that was a priority for them. Yes, that was that big an indicator.
Actually, I think that's actually pretty accurate, because a donor that doesn't have the desire to give, irrespective of what the tax benefits are, they're not going to give. And I'm grateful to be here today, and I'm going to share some of my own conversations and some of my own experiences. Before I get into sharing some of my experiences, I'd like to just remind everybody that in the first series we did have a presentation by our colleague Kevin Wong, who walked us through the tax considerations. And I think it's a good refresher for anybody that wants to go back and actually go through and get a good summary of what some of the tax implications are. Kevin actually did a really good job of walking us through the tax benefits. He talked a little bit about various donation strategies, including public securities, donations of life insurance policies. He talked about valuation issues associated with making gifts in kind. And he also got into the new estate planning, the new estate donation rules that came into effect in 2016 that actually created additional flexibility when it comes to leaving a legacy through your will. He did talk a little bit about making sure that you take into account the tax considerations and that you don't fall into any specific tracks, which is something that I do want to touch on a little bit today. When I talk about my experience in talking to donors about charitable giving, I'm fortunate in that I see our clients on a regular basis. We deal with them during personal tax season, and during their tax filing season, we're looking at what charitable gifts they're already making. We also get involved in their estate plans, and we have conversations with them about, how much of their estate is going to be left to a charity. And we have some pretty interesting conversations. There are clients that are adamant that, they do not want to leave anything to a charity. And the reason for that is that they feel that they are custodians of their assets for the benefit of their children, and they feel a sense of guilt of passing gifts on to their children, passing gifts on to charities without giving consideration to their children. But I think Tom talked a little bit about getting the family involved in the whole charitable giving process. And that's something that I think is important for donors to consider, that yes, you may be passing on some of your legacy to a charity and diverting that from your children, but why not bring the children into the equation and have them play a part in terms of the ultimate outcome of what happens with the charitable giving plans that the family intends to carry out. So those are conversations that we often find ourselves having with our clients. It's pretty interesting conversations. You have the other school of thought where the famous quote, and forgive me because I don't recall who actually stated this, but you give your children enough money to do something, but you don't give them enough to do nothing. We're hearing that more and more often these days. And as a result of that, we are seeing significantly greater legacy and bequest gifts in people's estate planning. And that's great to see. And that actually keeps us quite busy because we're helping them structure those gifts while I may not necessarily get involved in helping them determine where ultimately those funds will go, we do help ensure that they are getting the maximum tax benefits. I stated a few minutes earlier that, you know, in the first series, Kevin gave a presentation on the tax considerations. A couple of things that, you know, I would highlight as something to keep in mind is that when you are doing, specifically if you're doing estate planning, you do want to look at things like liquidity. If you're leaving a sizable amount of your estate to a charity, for instance, you want to make sure that you've got liquid assets in there to make those gifts, or figure out how your estate's going to be able to make that gift. The other thing that we are often challenged with is the timing of when those gifts are made and whether or not we can maximize the tax benefits associated with those gifts. The typical situation at death is that there's a large tax liability that gets triggered on the deceased tax return, and there's gifts that are made subsequent to that. The flexible rules in our estate plan and in the flexible rules that are provided to us with donations through our wills is that there is some flexibility about when that gift gets made, but there's a liquidity issue because usually often the gift is not made until sometime after the individual passed away, but you've got a tax liability that needs to be funded, and the refund or the tax benefit isn't realized until such time as that gift is actually made, which could be several years after the deceased. Another comment that I would share is just from my own experience, a couple things to think about is that we often assume that sizable gifts will eliminate the entire tax liability of the deceased, and that's not necessarily always the case. There are some peculiar rules in our tax legislation, and I point specifically to the way our Ontario tax laws, our tax liability is computed. In Ontario, we pay a surtax, and sometimes that surtax gets in the way of actually eliminating all the tax liability associated with a donor's gift. A specific situation would be when a donor has made sizable gifts, but at the same time also has significant significant dividend income. The dividend income results in a dividend tax credit, and then the way Ontario calculates its surtax, it doesn't take into account the dividend tax credit that factors into the calculation of the surtax. So sometimes you'll see that a donor may not have any federal tax liability, but they may still have an Ontario tax liability. It's a little anomaly with respect to the way our Ontario tax system works. We've seen proposals that they look to correct that at some point in time in the future. I'm not certain when that's going to happen, but it is something that currently is a situation and something we need to think about. When we look at timing, I'm a big fan of advising our clients to make the gifts during their lifetime, mainly because we know that they have significant income and they can take advantage of the tax benefits today. Also, it gives them the opportunity to play a greater role in their charitable giving planning. They have an opportunity to deal directly with the charity, have a little bit more say in terms of how the funds get used. And as we talked about earlier, also an opportunity to get the family involved in charitable giving. I'll give you some examples of things that we talk about with our clients. Oftentimes our clients will be business owners, and they'll be drawing salaries or dividends from their corporations. There's an opportunity there to use the combination of dividend income and charitable giving to eliminate, number one, their tax liability on the dividend, but at the same time, deal with something that we refer to as refundable tax. In our corporate tax structure, if you've got a corporation that earns passive income, we generate this terrible thing called refundable tax, and it becomes a little bit of a nightmare to recover it. Well, oftentimes we factor that into the conversation when we're talking about charitable giving, because there's an opportunity there that during your lifetime, if you withdraw funds in the form of dividends from your corporation, it allows the corporation to recover some of its refundable tax. And at the same time, those dividend dollars can be used to make a charitable donation. So those are some of the conversations that we have. When we look at things like tax efficient strategies, there are products and solutions out there that will propose to significantly reduce the overall cost of the donation. Those are things that that are available to donors, and things that a tax advisor should be involved in terms of looking at a tax advisor should be involved in overall assessing the benefit of those plans. I do caution that there's administrative costs and administrative fees that go along with some of those plans, and I would caution that you factor that into your charitable gift planning if you're looking to do one of those charitable gift strategy plans. One of the basic things that we advise our business owners to do is give some thought to using your corporate dollars to making the gift. And what I mean by that is actually donating shares of your private company. I'm not suggesting that there's any tax benefit per se of donating shares of your private company, but what it ultimately does is it allows you to take funds out of your corporation using the capital gains rate and provides you with a charitable donation benefit at the normal tax benefit rates, which are generally either 46% or 50%, depending on your tax bracket. So you're paying tax on taking funds out of your corporation at 26%, but getting a charitable donation credit of either 46 or 50%. So that's a good strategy for clients that have corporations and are willing to use their corporate dollars in order to make that gift. At this point, I think I'd like to pass it on to Craig to walk us through a couple of scenarios. And Craig, if you don't mind, maybe as you go through your scenarios, I can share some additional tax strategies.
That sounds great, Armando. Yeah, so I thought the best way, I'd have the slides moved over there a bit for me. I don't need to look at me though. You can go straight to the first slide if you will. So I thought the best way for me to approach today was to create some scenarios. And the reason I thought that was really to stress how common opportunities are to discuss these things with your clients. But before I even get into that, I want to go back to something that Anne-Marie said, and I want to go back to something that Tom said. So Anne-Marie used the word joy, and coming into today, I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the fact that when we are engaging in our own practice, parts of our practice give us joy. And I think I certainly can speak for Lisa. I can speak probably for a lot of the advisors in the room, that the part that gives a lot of us the most joy is getting to know our clients. So lean into that. Just take the time. A lot of what Tom was saying had a lot to do with that. Lisa reiterated the listening, but take joy from it. Like, that's the best part of our job, is getting to know our clients. But also, the fun thing about philanthropy and that part of our practice is it allows us to be creative. It allows us to have a bit of fun with our job. It allows us sometimes to flex our muscles a little bit and say, look at all these options I can present to you, both from a tax planning point of view, a probate planning point of view, in terms of how you might want to look at your planning. So, I think for all of us, if we take that time to enjoy the parts of our practice that give us joy, but also focus on what the clients, if you've got them into the conversation around philanthropy, and this is what Anne-Marie was saying, you need to get a sense of your clients, get a sense of their personalities, and do your best to engage with what part of philanthropy will give them the most value. There will be some clients that derive the value from the savings, or there will be some clients that derive the value from the legacy and the recognition, or there will be some clients that derive the value just from benefit. And I'm not valuing one of these more than the other, but if you get a sense of how your clients will derive value from philanthropy, you'll be able to offer them a lot more value. So Sam and Iris. So this example is really meant to be an example that advisors run into a lot. We live in the GTA. The GTA is a very affluent area, and running into something like this is quite normal. So they're both in their late 60s. They have 2 adult children. They did lose one child from cancer. So they had 3 children during their lifetime. They have grandchildren. They have 2 dogs. Sam was trained as an engineer, but he went into teaching. And he was a lifetime teacher, and he's now benefiting from that pension. Iris became a very successful real estate agent, did very well doing that, has a lot of savings from planning well. And, they enjoy the outdoors, and they're both amateur musicians. So this is what you're going to learn from just getting to know your clients. Obviously, you'll learn a lot more, but that's the getting to know your clients part. Then into the technical part. So they recently sold their home, we'll say it's in Mississauga, for $2 million and downsized to a condo for $1 million. They have a cottage worth $2 million that they've owned for 30 years, and everybody knows what cottages have been doing during COVID. Iris has $1.5 million in her RSPs, and Sam, of course, has his full pension. They have a non-registered joint investment account worth $2.5 million following the sale of their home. So obviously they had some savings and it got bumped up by the house. So I raise this example because you can see how common it is. I mean, obviously not every part of this is going to be common, but in general, you can expect to see something like this from a lot of people. But also because there's so many touch points here, right? The main financial discussion for me is with these clients, you have an estate that you're probably not going to deplete. Sam's got his pension. With my clients, I tease them when they're into the retirement mode. And I say to them, in my experience, a lot of people, when they're not earning new income, when they're not working or doing whatever they did to earn their income, they start to have squirrel brain. So on top of having assets that they're unlikely to deplete because of Sam's secured income, their good level of savings, they're going to start spending less. People just do that. We can encourage them not to do that, but they do it. They have squirrel brain when they stop earning new money. So I'm starting with, wow, looks like your estate's going to be pretty, it's unlikely that you're going to deplete it over your lifetime. Then, of course, any of us on this are going to identify two large sources of tax on death. There's the RSP, which will become a RIF, which will be unlikely to be drawn down enough by the time they both die. So there's probably a big bill there. And of course, the cottage is the other one. So we've got the fact that their assets are probably not going to go down. They're not going to spend. And that covers some of what Tom was talking about earlier. We've got two big tax opportunities, which may or may not be their driving force. And then you can obviously identify some of the, if they haven't thought about philanthropy yet, they've got a lot of touch points here. They lost a child to cancer. They love the outdoors. They love their dogs. They love their grandchildren. They're musicians. So many things to talk about if they haven't talked about charity before. Now, my second slide is going to deal more with getting into the meat of how to give. But before I move on, I would take a second now to throw it back to Armando, see if he has any ideas, and Tom too. So Armando, can somebody ping Armando there so he's back on screen?
I'm here. Going back to one of the comments that I made earlier about, my preference is make donations during your lifetime so you can actually see the fruits of your donation. I mean, when you look at that large RSP, it's going to become a RIF with the significant pension income that they already have. They're likely not going to be depleting that. Is there a recommendation here that they start withdrawing from that RSP in order to make gifts during their lifetime? That's something to think about. They do have a large tax liability that they're going to have to fund from the cottage, and the liability on the RSP, if you start drawing down during your lifetime, that gives you the opportunity to offset the tax liability with those donations. Those are a couple thoughts. I mean, they do have a non-registered account, and to the extent that you've got stock in there with an accrued gain, you've got the ability there to donate those securities and completely eliminate that gain, which saves you another 26% tax on that. So that's another good strategy to think about.
So before I go on to the other slide, Tom, did you want to add anything there?
The only thing, of course, my eyes light up when I don't see a TFSA. So I would, of course, open two tax-free savings accounts, one for each of them. And there's 150 grand or so that they would set aside there. But that's it.
Yeah, and I would just add before we go on that from the probate planning piece, maybe a direct designation. Like I agree with Armando, if we can get people engaged during their lifetime, that's probably better. And they're going to derive more joy and value from that. But you get to combine the tax and probate planning with what's left over in the RIF by using some more strategic designations, not necessarily relying on the forms that the RSP providers might have. Also, maybe not relying on the will, so it's not too stiff if they want to change what their charitable intentions are over time. If you have a designation in an outside document, it makes it much more flexible. So I'll go to the second example, which I would say is also not uncommon in the facts. So the facts here are you have a couple who never had kids, and they've been successful in a business that they started together. Their value has grown accordingly. Janice and George recently sold a good portion of their company to an internal management group. So somewhere in this structure, you would probably see, cash and liquidity going up. There may be a payment over time so that they're, the money they're paying to the CRA is spread out over time. But these clients are coming in telling you they intend to deal with charity. And again, when I started by saying, we should take joy in being able to help our clients with this, and that makes the conversation very easy, but also focusing on how your clients might derive joy from it. This is where we get to really get into the meat of, what is going to give these clients the most value and joy and benefit in their gifting. And, this is absolutely one which cries out to start the gifting experience earlier. But you still have to get to know your clients. Are these people who are a bit laissez-faire, right? They know they want to give to charity, but they're not too concerned about putting their name on it or having some having a legacy fund, which they get to kind of see happen forever. And they're also not control people. They're not there. They're not trying to control necessarily what's going on. Well, that might be a couple that is going for the big bang for the buck. And I know there's some charities listening today. If they're the type that might be going for, to experience the biggest bang for their buck, that in that case, you might be, and I might be not using that term in my own way, but they might be engaging with one or two or a lower number of specific charities. But the fun part of that one will be actually engaging with the charities to come up with a gifting agreement or a gifting plan that they know, the clients know where the monies go when it happens. In the middle, which I think a lot of us on the call would say is going to fit a lot of people a lot of the time, is the donor advised fund. Right? If we want to get people gifting and we want them to feel the joy and the value of gifting, donor advised funds are one of the best ways for people to get their feet wet. It is not expensive in most of community foundations and donor advised funds to get one started. So they can get it started. They can start to feel what it's like to both grant, to meet with people like Anne-Marie, to get advice about, who they could benefit. And it's a much more tactile experience. So, I think for a lot of clients where we can encourage them to start gifting during their lifetime, the donor advised fund is going to be a good way to begin that experience. And then on the far side, which is going to be the rarest of everybody, but for people like me and Armando, it's still very fun for us to do this. It's a very fun part of our practice, would be the private foundation. The private foundation is usually going to suit somebody that wants to have a bit more control. It's going to suit somebody that's able to do a large upfront gift, which is going to make the administration of it less of a burden. And so, hopefully with what I'm saying, I'm giving you the sense that, take the joy in getting to know your client, take the joy in, being able to have the philanthropy conversation, because it's one of the most creative ways we get to kind of do our job, but also get to know your client so you can identify where they will get the most value and joy. And I think if you get to know your client and focus on just having fun a lot of the time, this stuff is so natural. Like, it really is so natural. For me personally, I can say it's never difficult if you can see a few touch points in bringing up the conversation. So I'll pass it on to the guys. I can see them there. Guys, you want to add anything to this example?
I'll give you a couple comments from the tax side. couple things. So when we talk about the fact that they recently sold 70% of their operating company, depending on when that happened, if it happened last year, then you're kind of out of luck for the gain that you realized last year to be able to offset a donation against that gain. One of the, that brings up a pretty interesting point in that when you talked about the, using something like a community foundation versus setting up a private foundation, oftentimes it's the last minute when the vendors decide they want to donate some of the proceeds from the sale of their business, and there isn't time to set up a private foundation, nor is there time for them to really think about ultimately what charities are going to benefit from this. So why not a community foundation? Anne-Marie can probably speak to how quick and easy it is to set up their fund. And from a timing perspective, that makes most sense. The other thing I point out in your specific example there, you're talking about them receiving proceeds over 5 years. So there may still be the opportunity, depending on how they're taxing the gain. If they're taking a reserve and taxing that over 5 years, then we still have some time to time the donation with the realization of the capital gain. So those are a couple comments, couple things to think about.
Yeah, and I would add, going back to when I first started chatting about the different steps that as financial advisors look at, well, as we start the discovery process, one of the very first things we do is talk about their other professionals. So who is their lawyer, who is their accountant, make sure that that team is working together so that you can put a plan in place like this that makes the most sense and has optimized all those 3 areas as well. And then in this particular case, yeah, one of our viewers today made a comment there that you could consider something like life insurance, joint tenants rights, the joint last to die, and that may make some sense from a tactical perspective as well.
Yeah, so I guess to sum up for all of us in a way, enjoy the process with your clients, and if you enjoy getting to know your clients, this stuff is going to be easy. And then draw on the resources that you have around you. I mean, as Tom just mentioned, see what the team is. But in addition to that team, get to know your charities, get to know your community foundations, get to know every opportunity I have in the state to meet the donor advisor at whatever charity it is. It's a great opportunity.
That's great. Craig, your passion just shines right through. Thank you for those great examples. And Armando, you as well. I appreciate you sharing your experiences. And I really love the concept of bringing children into the conversation. I find gone are the days where, families of wealth, where the parents just keep it all very quiet. They're secretive about how much they have, or they're secretive about their plans. I think I'm seeing in my practice even an increased involvement from family. And it's so amazing when the children also embrace the philanthropy. And I think those are the values that are learned from the prior generations. Thank you to each of our panelists for all of your great perspectives. Some really great information about having that philanthropic conversation from the perspective of financial advisors, tax advisors, and legal advisors, which, as we've just heard, is a really well-rounded circle of influence. So that's wonderful. And I think with 10 minutes to go, I would suggest, I see that we have some questions in the chat. Perhaps, Jim, if you don't mind, I think it'd be great if we can answer some specific questions that have been brought up during the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. I think that would be a great idea. The first one, well, it was sent to Tom, but maybe everybody could give some input. What do you think is an appropriate age to start an investment plan, either for life, retirement, or for estate planning? Is there an age that is too young, or is there a portfolio size that's too small?
Great question. Thanks, Jim. I'll take a stab at that to begin with. So, you know what? I look at my own practice, and I could say that many times I meet my clients' children when they're very, very young. And often, the first investment that's made for their benefit is an RESP. And often parents will start to get them involved so they have an understanding of what that is. And they get to know me and understand who I am as well as their advisor. When they hit that magical 18, they have an opportunity, if they have some savings, because often there's gifts and different things that come to them, they can then have that asset start to grow in their own name. Just recently, I had a client who said, you know what, my young man, he's finished his university, he's got his first full-time job, I want you to meet with him. So we did our video call, We set him up with his first tax-free savings account. So there's $1,000 in there. So it's a great start for him. And he's going to see the benefit of that growing for years and years and years to come. So, you know, you can start small. You can start with $100 a month and just get things going. And when people are educated about, you know, the effective compounding in time and what that means to them, and then they also understand, we talk some basics about the difference between the different types of accounts, so tax-free savings accounts, RSPs, open accounts. It doesn't take a whole lot to get them going and started on the right foot. And they're very actively engaged and interested. And they certainly want the app on their phone right away to make sure they can track their investments. Not that they need to do it every day, but it's just that excitement to share that. And to me, I think it starts young when they're kids. And just a matter of making a connection with them at that point, whoever their advisor happens to be.
Great. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Or?
Tom's the guy. That was a great answer.
Okay. The next two questions kind of go hand in hand. So the first one is, what are some of the concerns people have when selecting a charity to donate to? That's for all three of you.
I'm happy to go first and answer that. So in addition to being an advisor to the donors, I also service a number of charity clients. And, you know, one of the things that I would point them to is that there is public information available out there for you to assess whether or not your dollars will be put to good use. And so there is public information available for you to make that assessment. I also think it's really important to actually just reach out to the charity. I know that there are a number of executive directors on this call today, and I'm sure any of them would be very grateful to take a donor's call and answer their questions. I think it's so important to really understand where your dollars are going. And I can speak from myself being a donor that I'm also very cautious about where my dollars go. And I think twice about certain organizations, you know, that whether or not to donate to them. And I am conscientious of, you know, making sure that I'm giving my money to an organization that's ultimately going to put that money to good use.
Great. Craig?
Yeah, I'd add a couple things to that. So as Armando said, for those that I think a lot of the folks on this would know, but the charities directorate on the CRA now has, like, it literally has annual financial summaries so there is a ton of information there. And I find my clients relying on that information more, which is good. I will say in general that actually I find that my clients that either through our conversations or just because that's where they're at, do have charitable intentions. If they've identified the purposes that draw them to philanthropy, I don't find myself having that conversation about admin fees or, you know, I don't find myself in that conversation, but I'm also very, very quick to dispel it because, you know, I've been a board member of an organization for 11 years. And I can tell them how big our budget is, and I can tell them exactly what our administration expense is. And I think sometimes when people get focused on that, it's just the wrong focus. So I will dispel clients from that focus very, very quickly. But then, you know, if I'm getting into which charity are you picking and how much are we talking about, I might talk to them a bit about what is the financial sophistication of the charity. So if I have somebody that wants to give to engineering at U of T, you're dealing with a sophisticated entity. Now, because they're a big administrative body, I might be encouraging them to be a little more specific about the gift, so it doesn't just go into the general pool. Whereas if I'm dealing with, you know, the local humane society and they want to donate a lot and they want it to go a long way, that's where my conversation might come back to the donor advised fund or something like that, so that we know those dollars can go the farthest. So that's how I'll kind of address concerns. Or I might preempt some of those conversations.
Great. Tom?
Yeah, a couple quick, you guys have covered a lot of ground there that's terrific. I would add, you know, getting to know the charity on a personal basis for me has made a difference. And I know in some of my clients' lives, that's important to them. So whether they attend some of the events, they become donors, they're on the board, they question, you know, the various materials, the annual reports, they're getting involved and they enjoy that. And I think that just, it builds that relationship and it creates a foundation that's strong. And then they continue to build that throughout their lives. So they're not looking at this in many cases to be just this one-time donation and then it's done. in many cases, it's a long-term relationship that they're looking for. So they want to ensure that that entity is successful. Otherwise, they wouldn't consider supporting them.
Great. So the next question kind of ties into that. Do any of you have an example of a client who came to you and kind of knew exactly what they wanted to do in regards to philanthropy in their plans?
I'll address it quick. I mean, I find the ones that have come to me with a lot of clarity in what they want to do is because they've already talked to somebody else. They've already talked to somebody like Anne-Marie. Those are the clients that I find that have a lot of clarity, or they've already been dealing with somebody like Armando and they know they want to do their own foundation. So yeah, I would say certainly there's clients that have a lot of clarity on who they want to benefit, but getting to that level of clarity where they know exactly what they want to do, they've either done their own research or they've already met with somebody at the charity or at a foundation like the Mississauga Community Foundation. That's my experience.
Okay, Tom?
Very similar for me. I think the most recent case, I came across a client who had uncovered a little bit of money that he didn't know he had. So he said, you know what, this is found money. I'm not keeping it. I'm giving it away. And here are the 6 charities I want to benefit. Now, this wasn't a massive amount of money, but he had done his homework. He'd had a relationship with them for many years and said, I'm done. I know what I want to do. Here's it. It's going to go there. Done.
Great. Okay, this other question, we kind of got it answered a little bit. It was in regard to using, it was in Craig's example, using life insurance to fund the tax liability. I guess the question really is, could you use the insurance to do kind of double duty to fund the tax liability and fund a charitable gift? And what order would you have it working on? And I know Armando talked about make sure you've got liquidity. So if anybody could share any ideas on that.
I'll just quickly comment on the donation of life insurance policies. Kevin Wong did cover that in his material and in the first series. It does make sense. It's it's an analysis that anybody that has charitable and philanthropic thoughts should consider whether or not life insurance plays a role in your charitable giving. There are good products out there, and I'm not suggesting that life insurance only has one purpose. As a tax advisor, we do often encourage our clients to buy life insurance specifically to fund the tax liability at death, or the buyout of another shareholder if they're in business with someone, and it does suit a purpose there. And in those cases, what you're doing is really providing that liquidity that I keep talking about, because that's the big thing that I find when I'm doing estate planning for individuals, is that the liquidity often isn't there, and the life insurance helps with that, helps to provide that liquidity.
I'll just add that I'm seeing more sophisticated insurance charity combined plans than I was used to in the past. And I am in no way qualified to speak on how those work, but I think you could do a whole presentation just on the role of life insurance and the role it can play in making philanthropy easier, less expensive, bigger bang for your buck. I think there's a lot of issues to cover there.
Great. Thanks, guys. There's just a couple of questions that we can't get to, but actually I've got one more. Lisa just told me we have time to take one more question, and this is in regard to, as kind of experts in this field, would you attend events put on by charities so that you're getting updated on their outcomes and the impacts that charity is having, to make you a little more aware?
Yeah,
I'll just quickly add that.
Go ahead, Armando. Yeah.
Yeah, just very quickly, I love to hear the impact stories. I like to hear, how the funds are being used, and I would encourage charities to continue promoting those stories, because that's what donors want to hear. They want it. They want to have a good understanding of where their dollars are going and the impact that it's having.
Yeah, and I would just add, I love to see it when charities are getting together to do this. So if you were going to invite me to something that's, an hour at lunchtime, just like this, I'd love to see a few charities across sectors, maybe from the same community, get together, and, we get to hear all kinds of things that are going on. So that might be the only suggestion I would make.
Great.
That's great. I think we got a couple of good ideas for future sessions as well. That's excellent.
That's right.
Yeah, the impacting is great.
Okay, Lisa, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. As we're reaching the hour now, I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. And once again, thank you so much to our presenters, Tom, Armando, and Craig, for sharing your wonderful expertise today. You shared some really valuable information for our advisors, charities, and individuals alike. Thank you also, Jim Kennedy, for assisting us with questions, and Pauline Pabesma for your technical expertise. In a follow-up to today's session, we will be sending out a brief survey for feedback and suggestions on future sessions. We'd really welcome the feedback, so please just take the few minutes and return those to us. I'm also happy to report that planning is underway for our fall session, so please stay tuned for some of those details. As a quick reminder, there's a ton of really great information that advisors can find on the Foundation's website. You'll see a resource link on the screen, and there's also a great tab for advisors on the website. So please take a look at that if you're ever looking for information. As well, if you or your firm could benefit from an information session, please contact Anne-Marie Pierce. She'd be more than happy to arrange that with you. The Community Foundation of Mississauga works tirelessly to encourage philanthropy in support of our community. We do hope that you'll join us in shining a light on our work, and when appropriate, to bring the foundation into your discussions. Anne-Marie Pierce is happy to provide you with any information that you might require. And again, we'll just a reminder that the website has lots of really helpful supporting information. Finally, on behalf of the Endowment Committee, thank you for attending today's session. We're pleased that you could join us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.